Hello and welcome to another episode of the ICC Academy Livecast, a new podcast series where we take a deeper dive into global business trends and ideas. I'm your host Thomas Paris, and in this episode, we will explore the world of leadership training and its role in cultivating sustainable business models. Our special guest today is Jaspal Bajwa, world-renowned senior leadership coach and founder of Sunya Circle Authentic Leadership Associates. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Thank you, Thomas. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity. I always like to introduce myself as a practitioner first, because most of my life, that's what I have done. So after a 35-year career in various corporations, I took a thread out of it and pulled it into my last 10 years. And that thread was around future leaders. So I'm now what you would call a practitioner, come coach. And what I like to do most of all is to continue my lifelong passion to learn, unlearn, relearn, and then share it. So that's what I hope we'll be able to do today for the next half hour or so. Share my learnings, and let's see if any part of my practical experience can help the listeners today.
Oh, absolutely. So you mentioned learning and relearning and unlearning. A lot of that is paradoxical, and I think that's one of the defining traits of the way that you like to run some of your training. Maybe with that lens, can you explain to the audience a little bit about what it means to be a transformational leader today?
Certainly. You're right. You picked up the thread of the power of the opposites, and you called it, perhaps you used the word paradox. The transformational leader, Thomas, is just one amongst many terms we use for truly inspirational leaders. And there are other terms, and they have all sort of evolved in the last quarter of the 20th century. So when I was getting into the workforce, it was the mid-70s. And therefore, even as I was learning on the job, if I kept my ear to the ground, I could actually see that thought leaders were continuing to contribute to the art and science of leadership in a major way, mid-70s through to the end of the century. So transformational leadership, therefore, is about nothing but talking about the highest order that is possible for a leader or a group of, as a leadership team, to create value, but with three very important adjectives: significant value, enduring value, and into the service and delight of diverse stakeholders. So, in a nutshell, then, transformational leadership just opens for us the chance to practice an art form which is considered one of the highest forms of leadership. And you said learn and unlearn are two opposites, and sure enough, as I was learning for 35 years in various corporations, a lot of my background is, by the way, the food industry, 15 years, and with Nestle. So I was happy to be in the world's largest food company. Then I followed up with 10 years in Bausch & Lomb, and we were known for the guys who brought Ray-Ban sunglasses to the world, and then soft contact lenses to the world. And towards the end of my career, I'd also had a chance to work with branded generic pharmaceuticals. So I think the theme that sort of ended up playing a very important role in my formation as a leader, and therefore now as a coach who goes across the world sharing his learnings with others, is as a team of leaders, we always have the choice to dream as big as we dare to. And if we do want to talk today about transformational leadership or any other form of inspirational leadership, it's important to remember that dreaming big has no boundaries. And I was very fortunate, Thomas, all those 35 years across 35 countries, got to live in 3 different continents. But the common theme there in each assignment for me and my teams was, just prior to the assignment, impossible, can't be done, right? And so lucky, so I feel so privileged to have been a member of and then led teams who used to call themselves dream big, but deliver bigger. And sure enough, we were actually able to live out the statement called impossible is indeed possible. So yeah, I would love to share with you today a little bit of more of what happened, how did these learnings of mine on the job, and now I tend to go back to school every year for the last 9 years to train myself as a coach. Because as a coach, we are, there are 2 roles you can play in anyone's life. One is be very instructive and direct them and be in an instructor mode. Mm-hmm. And certainly as leaders, we do that. But there's another role, and as a coach or as a mentor, we are often asked to play, where we lead the person to discover their own solutions and answers. So the real art form there is asking the right questions and getting the person who is going to be coached or mentored to be able to firstly evolve their dreams as big as they dare to, and then live them out as well. Mm-hmm. So maybe today you want to take up this particular conundrum, if you might say, of as leaders, as coaches, are we there to instruct? Or as leaders and coaches, are we there to inspire? Mm-hmm. So, learn, unlearn, instruct, inspire, and several other such polar opposites. Just to give you an example, when you start your career, short-term and long-term results, both are required. When as a manager you go a bit senior and other people start reporting to you, you're asked for both task focus and people focus. Mm-hmm. And then later on as a profit center head, you're asked for both top line and bottom line. So if you like, we can today discover a little bit of the power that resides in all these so-called polar opposite qualities of a leader.
Now, I think that would be a worthwhile direction for us to go. So you mentioned the 2. So we have inspire and instruct. And I think it's important to also look back on your own prior experiences, because you were a practitioner first before you were a coach, right? There were many years where you were more of a manager, in a managerial position, and then you've slowly moved your way up into a more leadership in a more inspirational role.
Right.
So maybe we can take that approach as well as saying the importance of one and the other, but at different stages of the career. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can explain a little bit about, how important both inspiring and the instruction component are within the lifespan of a career or even a company.
Right. Certainly. Just to give a little bit of the background once again, when I was very young and I was launching new products, new industries, and you know very well that the failure rate of new products and new sectors, new businesses is usually very high. So was very fortunate that my career actually began at that end of the business where everything was highly risky. Resources were very limited, and new products normally don't have large budgets like large brands might have to advertise, etc. And importantly, it helped me to start reaching out to other functions in the same organization and truly bring in a diverse team of talent to bear on these new product and then new industry launches that I mentioned to you. I was sharing with you how everyone used to say, but this is impossible. They will never sell. And yet today, if you look back, some of these products and some of these industries are industry leaders. And so in the earlier stages of my career, clearly of these 2 verbs we've picked up, what's the role of instructive behavior of a leader? Where is it okay to instruct and direct? And where and when does the alternate quality start coming in, called the leader is there for inspiring? You just asked me whether it's an or situation or is it actually an and situation. Do we need both qualities? And even if I heard you correctly, you said maybe at the earlier stages of your career, the instruct model was a lot more in vogue, or it was more operationalized. I'd like to differ a little bit with you there, because although, yes, strictly speaking, when one is young in an organization and enters a large organization which has structures in place, standard operating procedures in place, protocols in place, it is true that the first thing we tend to learn is to fall in line and have the discipline of following whatever the core competencies of that particular industry, that particular company are. So on stage one, early stage career, in fact, in every assignment I would go to, I would make it my business to enter and say, teach me, what is the nature of your business? So even much later in my career, I found that as a very useful way of entering and saying, teach me, what is the business that we are in? Right? So the instructive aspect or the more structured aspect certainly helps when you go in and want to see what is the state of the art as it exists till there. The other word, inspiration, where I differed with you was that even as juniors, when we were beginning our career 50 years ago, we could feel inspired not necessarily by just the CEO or the top rungs of leadership. I found that we could in fact find ourselves being inspired by fellow workers sometimes, and sometimes at the front end of the organization. Let's say when we went for our training in the field and we were working with reps calling on grocery outlets or supermarkets, and then when we went for our training and went to work alongside shop floor workers, if you were a keen observer, you could actually see that in each of these people, although they were pretty low in the organization, could in fact inspire each other by the sheer approach that they took to their work ethic, to wanting to learn their trade and be better at it every single day. Yeah. So I'm one of those, therefore, as a lifelong learner, I claim that you can be inspired by just about anything you choose to be inspired by. It could be a fellow worker. It could be what great geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci have shared with us, and you could be inspired by nature. And that ancient teacher of man can actually be seen being deployed in modern day management and modern sciences. So up front in the discussion, I'm probably going to agree with you if you say both are required. And the only place I sort of differed with you was inspiration doesn't wait for senior leadership positions. It can actually happen anytime, and depending on where you seek your inspirations from. I claim I learn even from bacteria, by the way, from plants, from dolphins, from elephants. So you can get just about everything for me is a potential to learn and potential to be inspired.
Right. There's always that push and pull, right?
Yes. So these two verbs that we've picked up as from the lexicon of being a leader, to instruct and give direction on one side,
Yes.
to inspire on the other side. You're so right. One of them is heavily reliant on the ability to push. Yeah. So when we as leaders are there to give them a sense of direction, clarity, where are we going and why are we going there? Why do we need the structure, this protocol, this compliance to, let's say, corporate governance, or compliance to quality control, or compliance to financial stipulations from a stock exchange like, for example, the SOX compliance in the New York Stock Exchange, right? So very clearly, there is need for deep respect for anything that may be around the subject of the discipline of getting the job done in a particular industry, given whatever the requirements of that industry are, right? And meeting the standards that professional agencies, government agencies, professional associations have set for the best professionals in that particular sector. And then comes the alternate word called inspirational. leadership which sort of suggests that there is, instead of pushing people to fall in line and follow the rigor of process, I think the word inspire tends to remind us, as you said, of the word pulling them in and using the old term, you can take the horse to the water, but you cannot make it drink the water. So the inspirational aspect of leadership is when you are able to pull in and make the horse actually want to drink the water. Because the leadership team then has the ability to reach deep into the organization, somewhere we would call grassroots level leadership, and give them what they are earnestly looking for, which is a sense of creating destiny. Even more so in the new workforce that we now have in the 21st century. The millennials, Generation Z, they are coming into the workforce in big numbers. In fact, they are going to be more than 50% of the workforce in the next 5 years. Yeah. Now, these generations, very different from the older generation where I come from, in fact, have an even greater need to be a part of the destiny that is being created. They are looking for meaning and value in the work that they do. So the word inspire, therefore, the ability to pull people in across cultural backgrounds, has perhaps started making more of an impact in the most recent, I would say, 20 to 30 years, as against 50 years ago when I began my career.
Right.
Yeah. So therefore, for the last 9 years in Sunya Circle, which is the entity that I lead as Authentic Leadership Associates, we are very clear about this, that we would want the leaders to be even more future ready than they might be before, let's say, going for a leadership development or executive coaching, which, as you may have heard, has become a very big and very important input into the executive's life in the present day world. So with like-minded professionals, Sunya Circle is at the service of making leaders even more future ready than they might be otherwise, and perhaps get them comfortable with the notion of using both push and pull, the two words that you used. Inspire and instruct, perhaps both need to be understood in terms of how to best deploy them, those qualities of a leader.
So with the idea of becoming future ready for the next generation,
yes,
how are these, as you mentioned, millennials and Gen Z, how are they recalibrating those scales, right? Because you've been able to witness a change within your own experience of coaching different leaders for different industries, but also different age groups. How is this latest one reprioritizing the way that they choose which companies that they work for and which managers they'd like to work with, or even their teams and the people they would want to work with?
Right.
Is there a new way of approaching that?
Certainly. So it's, as I said, the leadership science, or whether it's an art or a science, of course, we often debate about it, has been evolving very rapidly. And you heard me say great strides were made in the last quarter of the 20th century. And in the most recent 10, 15 years, we have in fact started seeing evidence of what was initially just being talked about on the fringe. Just to give you a common thread of how it was first evolving on the shop floor when I was actually a fully operational executive, and take a thread from that and then bring you into the modern context, which you asked me, so how does it relate to the newer generation of the workforce, right? The thread I want to draw from my own experience, you heard me say that we took on risky, audacious new product launches, new industry launches, and we reveled in the art form of not only dreaming big but delivering bigger by adopting, one of the most favorite mottos of my teams used to be, either we find a way or we make one. Yeah. So clearly, even as a young leader, I was very, very clear in my head. In fact, I was fortunate to go back to business school within 1 year of being recruited as a trainee in marketing and new products, to help them select talent for Nestle in India for batch 2 to batch 6. So for me, this notion of pulling people together and having people smarter than me around myself and getting them to come up with a collaborative solution came home very early to me in my career as a lesson. Yeah. And it worked very well because for each one of those 35 years then, we were delivering not only short-term results, but also what everyone wanted, which was longer-term wealth. You heard me say that transformational leaders give you significant and enduring value creation. Yeah. So in each of my assignments, I was very proud, you could say, of not only giving the short-term result of a breakthrough into the market, but the longer-term wealth of future leaders, a culture which had respect for process rigor and an inclusive culture. So you could give, therefore, as a leader, you could choose to give only what you've been contracted for in the employee contract. You can equally choose to give much more of yourself, including future wealth to the organization through, as I said, future leaders and a rich portfolio of products, a very rich and vibrant culture, which we sometimes call a winning culture. We used to, in fact, nickname it as the E-star culture. E-star means you need to envision, you need to enable, engage, energize. Only then teams are able to execute with excellence. So that's E-star culture for you. Now, these threads which were getting born through actual practice on the shop floor for 35 years, your question was, how do they relate to the new workforce? Well, the new workforce is so clear. The millennials and the Generation Z are so clear about wanting to go every evening, go back home feeling they've made a difference. They had a job which was much more than just a 9 to 5. And they were actually there probably for a shared purpose, a cause, which is going to make a huge impact to not only the organization they're working for, but perhaps at the community or country or planet level, right? So some of these things that I was learning on the shop floor, as I said, for 35 years, are today the latest thought processes in the field of management and leadership science have brought out of the woodworks words, not just transformational leadership, but soon as Jim Collins wrote the blockbuster Good to Great, the terminology called level 5 leaders came into play, and it became quite current. And people started saying, wow, that's an aspirational leader to be. Yet there was a paradox in that. Jim Collins' team was not looking for this paradoxical quality that the level 5 leader had, which was fierce resolve for the business on one hand, but paradoxically, deep personal humility. Right? So similarly, servant leadership was first being written up about in the West, in America, in the mid-70s by a little known but a very famous person called Robert K. Greenleaf, right, whose career was in ATT. But you will be surprised to know that his thinking, although he was low profile like a level 5 leader, and he's going to be talking about an ancient art form called servant leadership, his thinking actually impacted great names in leadership science like Peter Drucker himself, Peter Senge, who is known for continuous learning organizations, Warren Bennis. All these big luminaries who were talking about management science and leadership actually took a lot of inspiration from this ancient art form, which Robert Greenleaf started talking about, called "We are here first to serve, and through our service, we are here to lead." You may ask, serve what? So some people would say, the people you lead. I try to take a slightly broader definition of it. We are here to serve the cause of the diverse stakeholders to whom our organization is committed.
Right.
Yeah. So all this, by the way, came to you just from the past, but the fact is that this new generation we are talking about, this is exactly where their heart belongs. Mm-hmm. They want meaning. They want value. They want to be involved in a collaborative, shared leadership space. And for me, it's music to my ears when I find they are quite comfortable with the polarities, with the opposites. So when, for some people, VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world we are living in, for some people it is cause for worry because there is no longer going to be any order, it's going to be chaos. Good news, the newer generation, the Generation Z, in fact, even more than the millennials, are quite comfortable to be able to toggle back and forth between polar opposite qualities and see the benefit of being agile, turning VUCA into an opportunity, not a problem, but an opportunity for almost infinite potential.
Right.
So those of us who are still in the workforce and are now older managers and leaders, perhaps it's time for us to reinvent ourselves if we want to remain relevant for the incoming workforce, because they are very clear what they're looking for from their leaders.
So we'll drill a little bit deeper into what you mean by a level 5 leader in this case, servant leadership, because I think that's really the crux of where we're, where we would like to go, where we'd like to get to. But before that, maybe we can, for our audience who might not be, aware of the spectrum that we're working with here, because we say level 5, but maybe you can break it down from the bottom of the pyramid all the way up, and then from there we'll just take the ball and run with it.
Certainly. So, in his way of hierarchy, there were level 1 to level 4 leaders as well. And the level 1, he clearly called what all of us are at the beginning of our career, and that is individual contributors. But at levels 2 and 3 and 4, he was clear that we do have a chance to see our practice of this art form evolve. So, in some very important ways, for example, a root question. Are the others who you lead there for you to instruct and command and control the way you want? So are they in your service? Or are they, by other roles in fact reversed, that as a leader, you are there to enable their success? And through their success, the enterprise success. Yeah. So in Jim Collins' hierarchy, therefore, or any other hierarchy, as you move from individual contributor status to being a competent manager first, because you're being given more resources, human resources, financial resources to manage, you certainly need to keep getting better at the business you are in. So you heard me lay a lot of emphasis on KYB, which is know your business, the core competencies of your business. There can be no shortcuts on that. You must have heard about the famous 10,000 hour principle, that any trade person, any sports person, unless we are willing to put in 10,000 hours of practice, there's no way we are going to be playing World League in that particular sport.
Yeah, that's a requisite for mastery. That's the old
Absolutely.
way of thinking. Yeah.
So as individual contributors, as competent managers, and then the next rung, we call them effective leaders, there is no shortcut to this, and the rigor of practice remains. The rigor of wanting to know your industry inside out remains. The only thing that starts changing is a couple of paradigms. First, what I just mentioned to you. As a leader, were others there for you or were you for them? That starts changing very quickly the moment we start saying you are an effective leader, an inspirational leader. So in transformational leadership, Bass and Burns were the thought leaders in the last quarter of previous century. They would have said to us, well, there are four eyes in a transformational leader. The first one, very simple, called intellectual stimulation. Just about all of us are able to intellectually stimulate people through smart strategy. Easy stuff. But from the second and third rung onwards, just like I was saying, a competent manager, when he or she wants to become an effective leader, in transformational leadership, they said that the leader needs to be able to provide inspirational motivation. Not just the word motivation. So not just transactional stuff, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. That's easy. By adding the prefix inspirational motivation, and very quickly adding the next quality called individualized consideration. So the second and third rung of transformational leadership already puts the bar up there before the fourth I kicks in, called you are an idealized influence. You wield influence of the variety where others consider you to be an ideal and they want to be like you. So that's the fourth I, right? So just to summarize, intellectual stimulation was easy. The real meat of it was do stuff with your own hands, learn by doing as you do inspirational motivation and individualized consideration. Only then at some stage the fourth I kicked in, where you became an idealized influence in people's lives. So that's the traditional theory of transformational leadership at the end of last century. We are now 20 years into this century, and I question you, did they lay enough emphasis on individualized consideration or inspirational motivation, or do we now, keeping the new requirements in mind, do we need to remind ourselves that perhaps there's a fifth I in play, and that is to buy into a paradigm? About 100 years ago, quantum physics was born on this planet. It just rediscovered old stuff again, just like servant leadership is rediscovering ancient lore. Lao Tzu, who was a sage and philosopher living in China, he actually wrote this 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. There are leaders of all kinds. Some are feared, some are respected. But he said, he was not a Jim Collins, but he was already writing wise things for leaders to follow. He said, however, the best leaders are those who, when the job is done, the people say, we did it. And their own name is nowhere there in the neon lights. So just like servant leadership being written up about in management or leadership books is a rediscovery of ancient wisdom, similarly, even this, what I just shared with you, quantum physics, 100-year-old science, question to each other, talking over this table, have we really internalized something that came to our knowledge just 100 years ago, which was rediscovered ancient knowledge from nature, which said everything, Thomas, is interconnected, firstly. And more importantly, everything is interdependent as well. So I would like to submit to you that in transformational leadership theory, perhaps there is place for the fifth I as well, just to stress the point of individualized consideration. We all come from different cultural backgrounds. Does the leader and his leadership team or her leadership team want to truly leverage diversity and have diverse talent working for you so that it can be a competitive edge in this global VUCA world of ours? My submission, as I said, is to perhaps build in this fifth I as well, so that as a leadership team, we find it easy to accept the paradigm that everything is interconnected, interdependent, and therefore not only emotional intelligence, which some people claim is nearly twice as important as IQ after you enter the workforce, and as you grow from an individual contributor to competent manager, effective leader, eventually an inspirational leader, level 5 leader, right? The science of positive psychology, which, by the way, in classroom sizes in business schools like Harvard have actually, they burst at the seams these days, says that you cannot do it without soft skills, without emotional intelligence. And some say it is almost twice as important as IQ. And if not that, at least as equal important to IQ. But when I bring in the notion of interconnectedness with you and interdependency, I think emotional intelligence needs to go to the next level, which we then call cultural intelligence, where we accept we are not only just social animals, but in fact we are tribal animals. And we have, as leaders, we need to be fluid across cultures, across tribes. And I want to be very clear with you, it's not just ethnicity I'm talking about. It's not just having led multinational teams. I'm talking to you about the ability to manage across geography. When I use the word term tribal, it can be within the same organization, the silos that exist, where the production people, the R&D people, the marketing, the HR function, they all have their own little tribes. And I, as a general manager, as profit center head, learned it very early in my career that I need to pull in everyone and not allow silos to happen. So what we used to call cross-functional collaboration in the old days, cross-functional team collaboration, in the modern context of the 21st century, we are calling it cultural intelligence and the ability to bring in shared, inclusive leadership around the table so that you can have a truly diverse team and hopefully a competitive edge against very agile, very disruptive, more nimble players, perhaps even smaller than you, but hungrier than you, nipping away at your heels. So if you're in the large organization sector, we can go back to the earlier thought we had of the two opposites. How can you make even an elephant learn to dance? Is, within quotes, one of the leaders in my previous corporation, Nestle, said this way back in the 80s. And there's a famous book on this as well, I think, written by one of the CEOs called Even Elephants Can Dance. So if we work in a large organization, the question is how can we be agile, entrepreneurial, nimble, and perhaps learn to disrupt ourselves before someone else disrupts us. So that's the paradox we need to manage. If we are a younger startup, of course, we are hungry enough to not just have 10x, we are probably going for 100x growth. But there, the equal and opposite qualities is what kind of discipline do they want in their troops, even as they give full rein to creativity. Yeah. So at each part of our discussion, you must have seen that there is this immense play between two equal and opposite qualities that need to be brought into play, not by just averaging them out. Because if I'd use the terms, let's say strategic and tactical. Let's say I use the words, the big picture, which is zoom out, and then a micro detail called zoom in. Keeping the 21st century in mind, suppose I said being digitally savvy and being giving full rein to creativity. That means data and creativity, right? Or machines, artificial intelligence and humans. Now, these are all apparent opposites. But if, as a transformational leader, we take the first step, which is, in positive psychology, we often say the first step is your own perspective. So learn to give yourself the permission to reframe your perspective. And perspective is nothing like, it's the same as every morning waking up and choosing a lens to wear. And perspective then, Thomas, creates our world reality for us, right? So the beauty of the subject we've been discussing today is that it's highly learnable. It's highly doable at any age. In the old days, we felt that you could learn new tricks only when you are young, formative years, etc. But the good news I bring, whether it's from positive psychology, whether it is from, let's say, other terms you may have heard called neuroplasticity, it suggests you the brain of the adult human being can actually be rewired to learn new habits. And habits, things that we repeatedly do every single day, are in fact what is perceived by the team as here's an authentic leader who lives, breathes the purpose, the shared values that we have. Yeah. So slightly long-winded answer to your question, but sort of got carried away, I must say.
I think it is important, and you did touched on the topic of dichotomy. When I'm listening to you, as much as I love the idea of, crowds of motivated young individuals, future managers, future leaders, really wanting to strive to, become a better manager, becoming a better leader, moving up the ladder, as you mentioned, moving up the hierarchy, you always have to keep in mind that there is going to be a certain level of cynicism and trying to grapple with the old ways of doing, right? So, in your experience, how do you tackle that? Because there is certain motivators, right? The newer generations are often, like you said, motivated by destiny, motivated by wanting to delight their clients or the people that they work with. But there are other motivators like financial performance as well. So how does being a servant leader, being an inspirational leader, actually have an impact on the business itself, and using that as a way to push people in towards improving themselves?
Great question. Thank you for asking, Thomas. Because sometimes when we talk about, the word servant evokes different images in different people's minds, depending on which culture we come from. And in the earlier years when it was being rediscovered, as I said, in the West between 1975 to the 90s, people were thinking, well, it's mainly for, Jesus and then Gandhi and then Nelson Mandela. So they were thinking it's more in the social sector or spiritual sector. But the good news, thanks for asking me about the financials, is that any evidence that's coming in now, because in the first instance, servant leader-led companies were not going to be easy to discover. Because by definition, like a level 5 leader had deep personal humility, servant leaders were perhaps one step ahead and did not want their names in neon lights. But now, most recent 10, 15 years, very interesting evidence which says that even on financial performance, servant leader-led companies are far superior to Fortune 500, Fortune 100, and they are listed in the Fortune 100 companies, the best companies to work for. And can you guess the order of magnitude I'm talking about? Am I talking about just a small incrementally better financial performance? Or is there any other order of magnitude that we're talking about?
I would guess anywhere from 25 to 50% being that's sort of the ceiling.
Wow. So would you like to go higher? Because Jim Collins claimed his research, which was very exhaustive research, by the way, and highly respected even today, said that if Fortune 500 companies were giving pre-tax portfolio return average 10.4%, then it is said that theirs was nearly 50% higher. So about 17 or 18% return.
Right.
So, but the good news I wanted to share with you was that the few companies which are led by servant leaders are in fact twice as high.
Wow.
And therefore in the upper 20s percent range. And on another criteria called return on to the investor, the return when compared with the top 100 companies is nearly 10 times superior. So it's either 3 times superior if you use one particular metric called pre-tax portfolio return. If you see just a simple return on investment made, $1 invested, and what happened to it 10 years later, there could be an order of magnitude of nearly 10 times superior. Yeah. And an annualized return like 41% on every $1 you invested in these companies. So very fortunate this kind of data has now started surfacing because, as I said, by definition, these companies were very low profile. Some of them were very big names too, by the way. So Southwest Airlines, Marriott, Starbucks under Howard Schultz. So some of them were big names, but nobody was talking too much about them. Examples, Popeye's Louisiana kitchen was turned around by the new CEO. She took over in the 2005 range, and by 2015 they got bought over by a larger organization, but a huge turnaround by a servant leader on every metric you could think about. So business growth, people growth, stakeholder delight, community, contribution to community. So just about every dimension, organizations which are led by servant leaders, who are perhaps even one notch higher than level 5 leaders, even the financials are just astounding. And I for one, cannot see why would we not then want more of this? Because in fact, this is the kind of leaders which this newer workforce we were talking about, the millennials and the Generation Z workforce, they are in fact looking for these kind of leaders who can give them not just the financial return that Wall Street asks from us, but a far larger, deeper, more sustainable contribution, which is what the wealth creation of the 21st century is going to be all about. Unlocking huge potential. But for that, first, we have to open our mindset out, adopt the new perspective I was asking you to open the mind out. And then that's just the beginning of the journey, Thomas. Opening our mind through a conscious choice is just the beginning of the journey. The real journey happens when you travel from the head to the heart region and come back to the earlier part of our discussion where you are able to pull at the heartstrings and seek allegiance to a cause and not just mere alignment, which a lot of us in organizations are happy just seeking alignment. So the real power in this subject we were talking about today, which is inspirational leadership and going for the stars, but in a sustainable way, is where you pull in a change in mind. So the first, maybe it's easy to remember if I gave you three words with the letter H. So the head, your mindset. And then just travel slowly down towards the middle of your body, your heart set. Is your heart open enough to go for a really big game, play it well, and get the best in your team into play? And great teams, as you know, they have not just expertise in the trade, but they have great team emotional intelligence. So they know in the middle of the field how to pass the ball at the right moment to the person who is best positioned to take a shot at the goal. Not necessarily the star performer of the team. Whoever is best positioned to take a shot at the goal. So great teams are all about their own expertise, 10,000 hours of practice we discussed earlier, but importantly, with a variable which kicks in called team emotional intelligence. The ability to trust each other and pass the ball to each other in the middle of the game as it happens and play the game therefore spontaneously. Yeah. And then the third H I wanted to give you, I gave you the head, the heart need to be aligned. The third H is self-suggested. Your hands, your habits need to be of the nature we call winning habits. Because while journeys do start from passionate curiosity, the desire to want to know, I was reminding ourselves of geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, others who have said passionate curiosity, to want to know about our customer, to want to know about our colleagues and community, to perhaps even want to know more about our own self and be a self-directed leader. Yeah. So the journeys start from curiosity usually. Deep and passionate curiosity, the desire to learn. Peter Senge decades ago was talking about the future organizations will be continuously learning organizations. But this learning, importantly, is happening not in an academic sort of a way, in a classroom situation. It's happening in the entire discussion we had today. We began by the fact that I've been a practitioner. So this learning is actually happening in the most important school that each one of us goes to, and that's the school of life itself. And this learning by doing, technical name for it is experiential learning, is in fact the only way. So when you have these three H's and aligned, your head, your heart, your hands and habits, there's just about nothing that can beat you and your team to be able to do what we began our discussion with today. Significant, enduring value creation, but in a way which delights multiple and diverse stakeholders.
Wow. So as we begin to wrap up, is there anything that you would like to leave our learners with? We've talked a lot about different topics during our discussion, but what is the one or two things that you would really want the learners of this episode to take away with?
Sure. Yes, you're right. We had a very interesting discussion and around the notions of push and pull and various other polarities. As a takeaway, I think I'm going to perhaps just mention three things. Right through our discussion today, Thomas, what came out was that you've got to be clear as a leader or a leadership team, why are you doing what you're doing? So any survey that's ever been done, whether it was done by Warren Bennis or recently by, and there was an article in Harvard Business Review about 2 years ago, any survey ever done when people have been asked, what are you looking for from your leaders to be inspired by them? I think that the message has not changed over the decades, and if anything, it has become louder now, and that is strength of character. In Sunya Circle, we actually give it a little bit of a how aspect to it, a doing aspect to it by saying authenticity in action. Mm-hmm. So that is clearly one of the themes that we were discussing about today, that fake leaders will find it increasingly difficult to carry the troops with them. And not just the troops, but the whole of society on whom they are going to be dependent in a highly interconnected, interdependent world of ours. The second and third takeaways are actually a pair of opposites. And we've talked a lot of opposites today. So I would like us to remind ourselves that this art or science of leadership is highly doable, learnable, provided we want to continue to become better at first the science part of it, which says, let's design for success. It's possible to use various methods of rigor to validate our strategy, the reason why we exist, the way we've structured the organization. So sometimes I call it have we audited ourselves for destiny, design, direction, doability, and delight, right? So we can design for success. But importantly, and here's an and therefore, we must never forget that this VUCA world of ours is even more spontaneous, agile, and nimble. And even though experience-based learning was considered important 50 years ago when I began, in the next few decades, it's going to become even more important. So it's possible to continue to learn and then become better at designing for success and learning by doing. So those are the few takeaways I would probably summarize. Strength of character, authenticity in action, number one, followed by design for success, and equal and opposite, continue to learn while you are in the middle of the playfield.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jaspal.
Thank you, Thomas. It was a pleasure sharing some of my learnings. I would not end without repeating the fact that although I am a practitioner come coach, but the real credential is just this. I hope my passion to continue to learn till the last day will continue, and I'll hopefully be able to contribute my learnings by sharing them. Maybe on any other occasion we have a time to chat with each other.
Yes, no, I think we've only begun to scratch the surface here. So no, we're absolutely going to be doing this again. So thank you so much for making the time. Maybe as one final closing thoughts from you, and this is just a question that just came to me while you were speaking, is what about the future leaders of tomorrow makes you the most optimistic for the future?
Well, I am such a big believer in next generation leaders.
Right.
Not only in 1977 was I going out as a talent scout, recruiting people smarter than me, but the little that I know of the new generations that are now coming to the forefront, millennials and Generation Z, huge potential there of young leaders, next generation leaders coming in who will be able to give our planet solutions which it definitely needs for sustainable businesses and hopefully even sustainable environment in this beautiful planet of ours. There's lots to do, and the younger people who are coming to the forefront, I don't want to take any names just yet,
right.
But yes, if you just go out and look, it's just wonderful to see them coming to the front and occupying their rightful place at the table.
Right.
Yeah. As a smaller subset of next generation leaders, by the way, although we were not talking today about women leaders, but I might add that to you as well, that I was the first person in Nestle 50 years ago to say, so we are a food company, we are the women managers and leaders. So I do take special modules for one-day programs for some of my clients for young women leaders as well. Mm. Now, it's not a and I make it clear that it's not a gender-specific thing. It's
diversity.
Yeah, it's diversity.
Right.
And therefore, younger leaders, diverse background leaders, I am one of those who has very high confidence in them and just looking forward to them taking over.
Right.
As I said, taking over or taking a rightful place at the table.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, we look forward. I certainly do to sort of explore those topics a little bit more in our second episode. But thank you again. This has been incredibly interesting. Thank you, Jaspal, for making the time.
It's been a pleasure for me, and thank you for allowing me to share some of my learnings.
As a reminder, we are hosting live broadcasts every month, so sign up on our website for free and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the ICC Livecast. See you next time.